In a quiet residential area in the Boston suburbs, the Maplewood district, stood a small house. Elizabeth Collins sat by the window, looking up from the manuscript in her hands to gaze into the distance. She had built a career of over 10 years as a children's book editor at the local publishing house, Northern Books. In the light, the few strands of gray in her brown hair seemed to shimmer. Despite her tired expression, her gentle and compassionate gaze remained unchanged. "Richard, what time are you coming home today?" she called to her husband from the living room. "Around 7, I think." "I have an important meeting today," Richard answered while hurriedly finishing his breakfast. He served as an executive in his father's real estate company. His somewhat angular face and well-groomed hair always gave off an air of success. Elizabeth and Richard had met in a literature club during their college years. Back then, they shared their dreams and hopes, promising to travel the world together someday. Now, 7 years into their marriage, that promise had been quietly shelved. Their lives had become increasingly bound by the expectations and traditions of the Morrison family. "It's about time for your hormone injection, are you all right?" Elizabeth could sense a mix of concern and impatience in Richard's kindness. They had wanted children since they first got married, but hadn't been blessed with any, and had started fertility treatments 3 years ago. The doctor had told them, "We haven't found any significant issues, but there's a possibility of unexplained infertility that's preventing conception." "I'm fine, I'm used to it by now," Elizabeth smiled, though her eyes remained clouded. Richard's family, the Morrisons, were known locally as an old-established family. His father, Harold, was a stern man with salt and pepper hair and permanent wrinkles between his eyebrows. As the founder of Morrison Real Estate, he wielded significant influence in the greater Boston real estate industry. His mother, Grace, was a central figure in local society, hosting various charity events and commanding respect as Mrs. Morrison. However, behind her refined appearance lurked a harsh, judgmental eye and unforgiving words. Richard had 2 siblings. His sister Victoria served as the sales director in their father's company, displaying such skill that she was known as the Iron Lady. His younger brother Bradley worked as an internist at the local hospital. He was the only one in the Morrison family who treated Elizabeth with kindness. From the beginning of her marriage, Elizabeth had struggled with her relationship with the Morrison family. The barbs and indirect criticism, especially from Grace and Victoria, constantly wounded her heart. "Beth works at a small local publishing house. But eventually, she'll devote more time to the home," Grace would say whenever she introduced Elizabeth to her friends, making Elizabeth feel that her career was being belittled. "She's really not from a suitable background for the Morrison family, is she?" Elizabeth had once accidentally overheard Grace saying to a friend on the phone. Elizabeth's father had been a high school English teacher, and her mother had passed away early. She had been raised by her grandmother Edith, who had also died 5 years ago. For the Morrison family, that wasn't a sufficient pedigree. Victoria was no better. She constantly looked down on Elizabeth's career as just an editor. During family gatherings at Christmas and Thanksgiving, she would shower Elizabeth with questions like, "Beth, do jobs like yours even have salary increases?" all while wearing a pleasant expression. Meanwhile, Richard was caught between his wife and his family. Initially, he comforted his wife saying, "Don't mind them, they're always like that," but gradually he began to take his family's side more often. The pressure from Grace and Victoria intensified especially after they started fertility treatments. "The Morrison family has always produced strong boys," Grace would say. "To think that there's no child to continue our bloodline." Those words always hung in the air unfinished, but their meaning was clear. Victoria was more direct. "I've had 2 children and still manage the company," she would always showcase her success in front of Elizabeth. Elizabeth had expressed her frustrations to her husband, but Richard's reactions gradually grew colder. "Mother and the others are just concerned about the future of the Morrison family, or Victoria may speak that way, but she doesn't mean any harm," he would always defend his family. And today, too, Elizabeth sat alone, quietly reading through a manuscript, waiting for the time of her fertility injection. Outside the window, the trees swayed gently in the early autumn breeze, and in the distance, she could hear children laughing. Her heart felt strangely unsettled. On the morning of Elizabeth's birthday, Richard handed her a small gift box before rushing off to work. "Happy birthday. Let's celebrate properly tonight," he said, giving her a gentle kiss on the cheek. As Elizabeth was editing a manuscript on the living room sofa, the phone suddenly rang. She hesitated for a moment when she saw Grace Morrison displayed on the screen, but quickly answered. "Elizabeth, happy birthday." Grace's voice sounded brighter than usual. "Since it's a special day, I want to celebrate with you tonight. Let's meet with the whole family at Chateau Bloom at 7. Elizabeth was speechless. Chateau Bloom was one of the most exclusive French restaurants in Boston, where a single dish could cost as much as her daily salary. Grace had never before made such a grand gesture to celebrate her birthday. "Oh, thank you, Grace. But that's... No need to be modest. We're family," Grace interrupted her. "I've asked Richard to take care of something else, so please come directly to the restaurant. 7 o'clock sharp." Even after the call ended, Elizabeth remained confused. Why such a generous invitation all of a sudden? And why separately from Richard? The questions were endless, but a small hope also grew in her heart. In the evening, Elizabeth called Richard. "Are you sure this is okay? Your mother suddenly..." "Yes, I heard from her." Richard's voice sounded a bit tense. "I'll join you later. Mother is trying to meet you halfway. Enjoy yourself." Elizabeth chose a black cocktail dress appropriate for the special occasion. The subtle lace along the neckline beautifully accentuated her neck. She put her hair up and wore the simple diamond necklace Richard had given her for her birthday. Standing before the mirror, Elizabeth felt a small confidence in her appearance. "It'll be fine," she reassured herself. This might be a new beginning. Chateau Bloom was a classic stone building with uniformed staff at the entrance. When Elizabeth arrived, the door was politely opened for her. "Welcome," a middle-aged manager bowed slightly. "I'm Elizabeth Morrison. I have a reservation at 7. A look of recognition crossed the manager's face. "Ah, the Morrison reservation. This way, please." She was led past the luxurious main dining area to a private room in the back. The soft light from chandeliers illuminated the hallway, and impressionist paintings adorned the walls. "Here is your table." The manager opened the door to a private room. As Elizabeth entered, she found herself in an empty room. A large round table covered with a white tablecloth, elaborate flower arrangements of roses, and 7 champagne glasses were set out. But there was no one there. "Excuse me, has everyone not arrived yet?" Elizabeth asked in confusion. The manager gave her a puzzled look. "All the Morrisons have already arrived. Please wait a moment." With that, he closed the door and left. Elizabeth slowly looked around the room. She noticed a small envelope placed on the table. Her name was written on it in elegant script. With trembling hands, Elizabeth picked up the envelope. When she opened it, 2 documents fell out. One was an official legal document, divorce papers. The other was a note in Grace's handwriting. "Happy birthday. The infertile defect must go. Without you, Richard can have a real family. Grace." Elizabeth's world stopped. Her vision blurred, and she could hear her heartbeat in her ears. The divorce papers already had Richard's signature on them. And on another piece of paper was a handwritten note from Richard. "I want to leave an heir for the Morrison family. It's no longer possible with you. I've already moved to another apartment. Goodbye. Richard." Elizabeth's hands trembled, and the papers fell to the floor. Hot tears rolled down her cheeks. "So this is how a 7-year marriage ends," she said aloud. The air in the room felt heavy, almost suffocating around her. She collapsed into a chair, unconsciously touching her ring. The memory of receiving this ring 7 years ago, full of hope and love, was vivid in her mind. And now, it had all crumbled in an instant. But amid the shock and sadness, another emotion began to rise from within Elizabeth. Faint at first, but gradually growing stronger: anger. Grace's cruel words, Richard's betrayal, and the fact that they had chosen Elizabeth's birthday for such a cruel act. She slowly stood up and wiped away her tears. "Defect," she repeated in a small but firm voice. Suddenly, determination filled Elizabeth. She went to the door and pressed the button to call the waiter. A young waiter appeared. "How may I help you, madam? Who is paying for tonight's dinner?" Elizabeth asked calmly. "It has been prearranged on Mr. Morrison's credit card," the waiter replied. A small smile appeared on Elizabeth's lips. "In that case, I'd like to order the finest dinner course and champagne. For one person." "Certainly," the waiter nodded and left. Elizabeth returned to the table and deeply inhaled the scent of the flowers. She put the divorce papers back in the envelope and tucked them into her bag. "This isn't the end," she quietly told herself. "This is the beginning." The champagne was brought in. Bubbles danced in the glass. Elizabeth gazed at them while beginning to formulate a plan in her mind. There was a light of determination in her eyes. 3 months had passed. Elizabeth was looking at the snow piling up outside the window of her small apartment. The divorce proceedings had gone surprisingly smoothly. The Morrison family's lawyer had handled everything, urging Elizabeth to sign quickly in exchange for her share of the joint property. She didn't even hire her own lawyer, quietly and swiftly accepting the separation from her past life. She never met Richard face to face, everything was done through representatives. There were no messages from him, no apologies, nothing. As if their 7-year marriage had been an illusion. Elizabeth picked up her coffee cup and looked at the envelope placed on the small kitchen table in her apartment. It was addressed to Ms. Elizabeth Collins. After the divorce, she had reverted to her maiden name. The envelope had arrived yesterday. It was from a law firm in Sayville, a small town in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. She hadn't opened it yet. The phone rang, pulling Elizabeth from her thoughts. "Hi, Jennifer," it was a colleague from the publishing house. "How are you? I've been worried since I haven't seen you around." "I'm fine, thank you," Elizabeth smiled. Jennifer was one of the few friends who had stood by her after the divorce. "I'm just taking a little break." "I understand. But you can come back anytime. Everyone's waiting for your manuscripts." After the call ended, Elizabeth turned her attention back to the envelope. Taking a deep breath, she finally opened it. "Dear Ms. Elizabeth Collins, we respectfully inform you regarding the execution of your grandmother, Edith N. Collins's will." Elizabeth's eyes widened as she read through the letter. Her grandmother Edith, who had been like a parent to her since childhood, had passed away 5 years ago. At the time, Elizabeth thought her inheritance consisted only of a small savings account and mementos. However, according to this letter, grandmother Edith had secret assets. Investments she had started in her youth had quietly but surely grown into a substantial fortune. And Edith had named Elizabeth, her only grandchild, as the heir. Assets totaling approximately $8 million will be transferred to you through a trust fund. As per Edith's instructions, this information was not to be disclosed until you reached the age of 35. Elizabeth dropped the letter and collapsed into a chair. $8 million. The figure danced in her head. Was this a joke? But the attached documents, the lawyer's signature, everything looked genuine. The next day, Elizabeth headed to Cape Cod and met with the lawyer, Jonathan Fisher. The gentle middle-aged man with gray hair confirmed everything. Edith was a wise woman, Jonathan said. She continued investing steadily from a young age, and her talent was remarkable. However, she always preferred a modest lifestyle and never publicized her wealth. But why didn't she tell me? Elizabeth asked. When I got married, when I was getting my education. Edith wanted you to carve out your own path in life, Jonathan smiled. And she specifically added the condition about waiting until you were 35 so that this inheritance wouldn't affect your marriage. Elizabeth was enveloped in complex emotions. If she had known about this inheritance earlier, would her relationship with the Morrison family have been different? Would Grace have still looked down on her for not being from a good enough background? Would Richard have still abandoned her? No, that's not the case, she told herself. Even with money, their essential nature wouldn't have changed. Elizabeth confided in Jonathan about her recent situation, the divorce, the Morrison family's treatment, and her current circumstances. Jonathan listened to her story with empathy and understanding. Elizabeth, you now have a wonderful opportunity to restart your life, he said. Edith's wish was for you to be truly happy. A few weeks later, Elizabeth made a new decision. First, she decided to get retested to determine the cause of her infertility. In the office of Dr. Sarah Chen, a renowned reproductive medicine specialist in Boston, Elizabeth was informed of a shocking fact. Elizabeth, Dr. Chen took her hand. There's nothing wrong with you. Actually, upon closer examination of the previous medical records, the cause of infertility was on Richard's side. What do you mean? His sperm count is extremely low, and motility is poor as well. This is a congenital issue, and the chances of conception were quite slim, Dr. Chen explained gently. These test results should have been communicated to Richard by the previous doctor. Elizabeth was stunned. But I never heard about this. Unfortunately, male infertility is often difficult for the individual to accept. Especially in families that place a high value on lineage. Dr. Chen's words echoed in Elizabeth's mind. Richard had known. And so had his family. Yet they had treated her as the defect. For the sake of the Morrison family's male pride. Knowing this truth, something changed within Elizabeth. It wasn't sadness or anger, but a quiet sense of liberation. She no longer needed to blame herself. By spring, Elizabeth had made a big decision. She decided to open a small bookstore specializing in children's books, a dream she had long held. She rented the first floor of an old stone building in Boston's Beacon Hill district and named it Edith's Bookshelf. The name, chosen in honor of her grandmother, seemed to give her strength. The bookstore's opening was a small event, but thanks to her connections in the publishing industry, local authors also attended. A reading corner for children, a cozy area with comfortable sofas, and shelves lined with carefully selected children's books. Elizabeth felt like she had finally found her place. One evening, she was reading the business section of the local newspaper. There was news that Morrison Real Estate was facing a management crisis. The real estate market had cooled due to the impact of the COVID pandemic, and Harold had accumulated substantial debt from a large project. Furthermore, several investments had failed, and the company was rapidly falling into financial difficulty. Richard's name was also mentioned in the article. He had lost his position in his father's company and was looking for new employment. Also, according to rumors, he had planned to remarry a young socialite soon after the divorce, but those plans had also fallen through due to the Morrison family's economic decline. Even after reading the article, Elizabeth didn't feel any particular emotion. The anger and sadness of the past no longer dominated her heart. The past is the past, she murmured, looking out the window. Elizabeth was surrounded by a dozen children in the reading corner of Edith's Bookshelf. A year had passed since her bookstore opened, and the Saturday morning reading events had become a popular local activity. As the children applauded with smiles, Elizabeth closed the book. Her bookstore had grown from a mere business into a community hub. Various events were regularly held, including readings by local authors, parent-child workshops, and special seminars for educators. That was a wonderful reading. At the quiet male voice, Elizabeth turned around. There stood a middle-aged man with a sophisticated air. Graying black hair, a gentle smile, and several children's science books in his arms. "Thank you," Elizabeth smiled. "How can I help you?" "I'm actually looking for books for my nephew," the man indicated the books. "He's fascinated with science, especially space." "That's a wonderful interest. I have more carefully selected books over here." Elizabeth guided the man to the bookshelf. The two began talking about children's science books, and their conversation gradually expanded. The man introduced himself as Michael Adams, a cardiac surgeon at Boston General Hospital. "I've been thinking about writing a medical book," Michael said. "But I don't know how to convey complex medical concepts to the general public." "That's a very valuable project," Elizabeth's eyes sparkled. "I have editing experience, so I might be able to help." From that day on, Michael began visiting the bookstore regularly. The two enjoyed conversations ranging from book selection and consultation on his medical book project, to gradually more personal topics. Elizabeth was drawn to Michael's intelligence and kindness, and Michael was captivated by her strength and compassion. When Elizabeth revealed her divorce experience, Michael didn't judge her but quietly listened to her story. "You're a truly strong person," he said. "To overcome such an experience and now be doing work that enriches the lives of others." Around the time their relationship was deepening, an unexpected visitor appeared. While Elizabeth was checking the accounts in the bookstore's office, there was a knock at the door. "Come in." The door opened, and there stood Richard. Gone was his confident appearance, he had a tired face and seemed to have lost some weight. There were fatigue circles under his eyes, and he looked noticeably older than a year ago. "Elizabeth," he hesitated, standing still. "Will you hear me out?" Elizabeth felt a momentary flutter in her chest but quickly regained her composure. "What do you want?" she asked calmly. "I was wrong." Richard entered the room and closed the door. "I want to sincerely apologize for that night on your birthday. I was being manipulated by my mother and Victoria." Elizabeth silently listened to his words. Her former husband's face showed shame and regret, emotions she had never seen in him before. "The company is on the verge of bankruptcy," Richard lowered his voice. "Father has taken to drinking, mother has been abandoned by her friends. Victoria has transferred to a small company in Chicago. We've lost everything." "And?" Elizabeth questioned without showing emotion. "Actually, our inability to have a baby was my fault," Richard lowered his eyes. "Bradley confirmed it medically. But mother said it was a family disgrace and told me to hide it." Elizabeth's heart swayed with complex emotions. Anger, sadness, and a strange sense of release. But her expression remained calm. "I blamed you then. I made it your fault." Richard's voice trembled. "I'm truly sorry. I understand now. You were a wonderful woman. I threw away the best wife for my family's foolish pride." As Richard was about to continue, Elizabeth's cell phone rang. "Excuse me," she answered the phone. "Jessica, what is it?" "It's from Mrs. Morrison," Elizabeth's secretary reported in a panicked voice. "She says her son Bradley has been hospitalized in an emergency. She says she needs to talk to you." After hanging up, Elizabeth's expression was filled with tension. "Bradley's been hospitalized." The color drained from Richard's face. "What? What happened?" The two rushed to the hospital. In the intensive care unit of Massachusetts General Hospital, Bradley lay in bed with a pale face. By his side sat Grace, looking exhausted. "Elizabeth, you came." Grace's voice had lost its former dignity. According to the doctor, Bradley had developed a hereditary kidney disease and needed dialysis. A transplant would be the best treatment, but there was no compatible donor in the family. The Morrison family had a hereditary tendency toward kidney disease, and Richard also carried a potential risk. "We've all been tested," Grace clutched a handkerchief with trembling hands. "But none of us are compatible." Elizabeth gazed at Bradley through the glass of the hospital room. He was the only one in the Morrison family who had been kind to her. "What's his condition?" Elizabeth asked the doctor. "He's stable at the moment, but his kidney function is declining rapidly. Without a compatible donor." The doctor's words trailed off. The next day, Grace came directly to Elizabeth's bookstore. Her formerly dignified appearance was gone, there were circles under her eyes, and her hair was disheveled. "Please, Elizabeth," Grace's voice choked. "Help Bradley. Would you consider getting tested for compatibility?" Elizabeth looked at her former mother-in-law, who had once called her a defect. The woman before her was no longer that arrogant Grace Morrison. She was just a mother concerned for her son's life. "Why are you asking me?" Elizabeth asked quietly. "You were always compassionate," Grace lowered her eyes. "And we have no one else to turn to now." After deep consideration and consultation with Michael, Elizabeth ultimately decided to get tested. Michael, as a doctor, supported her decision while worrying about her health and the psychological impact. "This is a big decision," Michael held her hand. "Considering what they did to you, no one would blame you." "But who would I become then?" Elizabeth answered quietly. "I would become just like them." The test results revealed that Elizabeth was compatible as a donor for Bradley. She could donate part of her kidney. The day before the surgery, Elizabeth visited Bradley's hospital room. He smiled weakly. "Why, are you doing this for me?" Bradley asked in a hoarse voice. "This isn't about forgiveness," Elizabeth answered honestly. "I just want to do what's right as a human being." On the morning of the surgery, she quietly told Grace, "This isn't for you or your family. I'm just doing what's right as a human being. And this is my final gift to you." The surgery was successful, and Bradley began recovering. Elizabeth's act was covered in the local newspaper, further enhancing her reputation. But for her, it was the final form of reconciliation with the past. She had followed her own conscience and fully opened the door to a new life. 2 years had passed. During Elizabeth's recovery period from the surgery, Michael had been dedicated in supporting her. Not just with appropriate care using his knowledge as a doctor, but his kindness and patience had fostered a strong bond in Elizabeth's heart. "Are you ready?" Michael peeked his face through the living room door. Just a moment more, Elizabeth was fitting pearl earrings in front of the mirror. A peaceful satisfaction showed on her face. A year ago, Elizabeth and Michael had held their wedding ceremony in a small church. It was a warm ceremony surrounded by colleagues from the publishing industry, regular customers from the bookstore, and Michael's family. Elizabeth was dressed in an elegant but not flashy ivory dress, holding a bouquet made of flowers from her hometown. After the wedding, the two had renovated Elizabeth's house, creating a bright and open shared home. At the same time, they had also launched a support group for couples struggling with infertility. Their activities, utilizing Elizabeth's experience and Michael's medical knowledge, were giving hope to many people. And 6 months ago, a new joy had been added to their lives. Through an adoption agency, they had welcomed 6-year-old twin girls, Emma and Sophia. The sisters, who had a history of abuse, were initially wary, but gradually opened their hearts to Elizabeth and Michael's dedicated love. "Come on, girls, let's go." Elizabeth entered the living room and smiled at the twins in their pretty dresses. "Where are we going?" Sophia asked with curious eyes. "A special place," Elizabeth answered gently. "A place with important memories for me." The four headed downtown by car and eventually arrived in front of Chateau Bloom. It was the upscale restaurant where Elizabeth had once eaten her birthday dinner alone, crying. "Welcome, Mr. and Mrs. Adams," the manager politely greeted the four. He was a different person from 3 years ago. As they were being shown to the main dining area, Elizabeth noticed two figures sitting at a table in the back of the restaurant. It was Grace and Richard. Grace had lost her former glamour, and Richard clearly looked aged. They also noticed Elizabeth, and their eyes met for a moment. Elizabeth just nodded slightly, then looked away and returned to her family. Michael gently placed his hand on her shoulder, and the twin girls were absorbed in the dessert menu before them. "At that time, I thought it was the end," Elizabeth quietly told Michael. "But in reality, it was the beginning of my true life." From across the table, complex gazes from Grace and Richard could be felt, but Elizabeth was no longer trapped in the past. She was looking forward, cherishing the happy times with her new family. The pain of the past had indeed hurt her, but at the same time, it had helped her grow into a stronger, more compassionate person. The soft light of late summer streamed through the restaurant windows, gently illuminating the smiles of Elizabeth's family. It was not an ending, but the radiance of a new beginning.